Welcome everyone to the Tennessee Native Plant Society's and monthly program, monthly seminar program. We have a delightful speaker coming up tonight, Sara Wittenberg. She's actually lives in Alabama, so she's just a little south of us, not far. And the picture on the screen at the moment, don't be concerned, it is a California picture. So that's why you're not seeing our natives in that picture. It's a California one. Sara's experience includes interning at the National Zoo in Costa Rica, directing the rehab program at the Southeastern Raptor Center, running a hawk watch banding station in the Florida Keys, tracking gopher tortoises, conducting breeding bird surveys for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and sandhill crane sage grouse surveys, and assisting with the Cornell University's search for the possibly extinct ivory-billed pecker. She has taught or coaches science at two public secondary schools, and believes strongly in sharing her passion for the natural world with the next generation of conservationists. Sara joined the Pollinator Partnership in early 2020 as the Project Wingspan Arkansas State Coordinator, then soon stepped into the role of Arkansas NRCS Pollinator Liaison. Most recently, Sara has become the Key to Bee-Friendly Garden Coordinator and is excited to grow the program and connect with those seeking ways to help pollinators on their own property. If you're interested in joining the Bee-Friendly Garden program, please contact Sara at sw@pollinator.org, and that is listed on the calendar on our website as well. So in case you want to contact her. So I am going to say, without further ado, Sara, unmute yourself and say hello.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for having me here tonight. And I enjoyed getting to meet Karen earlier today. I see you have no more mountain mint in your background now. You've changed plants. But we had a really nice talk, and she's a go-getter. She was telling me all about the work that she's been doing in her community and with developers and the new laws that have come into place. So that's really super amazing. I'm really impressed. And it sounds like you guys have a great group. It sounds like there's native plant experts and butterfly experts, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to know more about plants and butterflies than me. I actually worked with birds for my master's, so I have an ornithology background, and I'm still always learning more plants and more insects as I go. So yeah, I was listening to some of the talk too. This is a photo from California. It's Billy, our agricultural specialist garden that he built out there. It is really beautiful, and yes, those are California poppies. And no, not every single thing in his garden is native. So even if you know your California plants, you may pick out things here and there that you're like, I don't know about that. But and I actually do not live in Alabama. I live in Arkansas. My parents live in Alabama. I'm from Alabama, from Athens. So about an hour, a little over an hour from Nashville. So not too far from central Tennessee and maybe some of you. But no, I went to Auburn. War Eagle, one of you reached out to me today who also went to Auburn and worked at the Raptor Center like me. I went to Auburn for my undergrad and then came to the University of Arkansas for my master's, where I still reside. So anyways, enough about me. So we will dive right into the program. And thank you again for all being here. So I'm just going to try to move this. We've got all of our faces like kind of down the middle of our screen the way that it is. So here, okay. There we go. All right. So As she said, I've been working with Pollinator Partnership now for about 4.5 years, and I've had different roles with them, but currently I am the Bee Friendly Gardening Coordinator, which I'll talk a little bit more about in this presentation. But we're really just going to focus on pollinators in the garden, a little overview about pollinators, and how to build pollinator habitat. So that's kind of the focus for today. So Pollinator Partnership is the largest conservation organization in the world, dedicated exclusively to the health of pollinators. And why should we care about pollinators? For several reasons. We need them to help us make food, and they are food for other species. They provide many ecosystem services. They are an integral part of our planet's biodiversity. And simply put, they make the world more beautiful and interesting. So pollination is just the movement of pollen from the male parts of a flower to the female parts of a flower, which I don't need to tell you because you're the Native Plant Society and you, again, probably know more about plants than I do. But what I really want to kind of focus on here is that, that process can happen in multiple ways. And one of them is the movement of that pollen by animal pollinators. And so that's really the component that we focus on as an organization, are those animal pollinators. Pollination is essential to natural ecosystems as we know them, with about 90% of flowering plants, depending on where you are in the world, but on average requiring or benefiting from pollinators for seed and fruit formation. And about 1 in every 3 bites of food that we eat can be attributed to pollinators. And I like to show this picture. This is maybe you've seen this, it circulates widely, but this is a photo of the produce section in a Whole Foods grocery store. And what they did was they went through in the photo on the right and they took away everything that comes from pollinators that's dependent on animal pollination, basically to show you like what you would be missing. And to do that, they had to remove about 52% of the produce. This similarly shows if they were to go to the dairy case and they were to remove, everything that could be traced back to pollinators, we wouldn't have a whole lot of the yummy things that many of us probably enjoy. So just to kind of drive home the point of how important pollinators are to the foods that we really love. But I also, want to focus on, like, in addition to providing food for us, for people, pollinators provide many ecosystem services as well. So again, as an ornithologist and a birder, for me, pollinators are important as a food source for birds. There was one study that found that just to raise 1 clutch of baby chickadees, it took between 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. So that's a whole lot of caterpillars to get those birds raised and out of the nest. So again, one more reason why pollinators are extremely important to the ecosystem. They also, by helping plants reproduce and sustaining vegetation on the planet, pollinators help regulate climate, which is super important. So who are the pollinators? Well, frankly, they're any animal that moves pollen. So, there's the ones that everybody thinks about, of course, bees and butterflies and moths and insect pollinators. Some insect pollinators that many people don't realize are pollinators. There are some species of cockroaches that are pollinators, mosquitoes, which many of us don't like, and granted, we have a lot of non-native mosquitoes that are really a nuisance and potentially even dangerous, that are vectors of diseases, but there are some native pollinating mosquitoes. And they've even discovered that there are some crustaceans that pollinate seagrass underwater. So cool, but it extends beyond kind of those, what you might think of animal groups, to like the honey possum, this tiny little guy in the upper right of your screen. So there's some mammal pollinators and of course bats. We all know hummingbirds are pollinators. And as you get into the old world, those numbers of bird pollinators increase dramatically. And on the bottom right, you see a gecko. So there can be reptile pollinators as well. So it's actually a really incredibly diverse group. So when most people think of a bee, the average population, they think of a honeybee. And they're surprised to find out that our most iconic bee species is not even native to North America. We brought them over from Europe for their honey. Honeybees are social bees. They form large colonies. And while there are some feral colonies, most are managed or under the care of a beekeeper. So honeybees are considered agriculture. Raising honeybees is just like raising chickens or cattle. And they're hard to keep healthy through things like pests and diseases, threats from insecticides, not enough forage, and pressure from climate change. And in fact, there is evidence that managed honeybees can negatively impact native bee populations in some situations through competition for limited floral resources, by potentially changing the floral communities if they preferentially pollinate certain plants, such as non-natives, and through pathogen spillover or the transfer of diseases. In contrast to honeybees, we have over 4,000 species of native bees in North America. And they're essential for food and ecosystems. They are actually great crop pollinators. Unlike honeybees, though with few exceptions, like bumblebees, our native bees are solitary. They don't form colonies. They have no nest to defend. Therefore, they rarely sting. So I just wanted to show this short little video, and I'm hoping that you can hear it. It's actually really loud, but sometimes it doesn't convey through the computer. But this is Pollinator Partnerships Associate Director's daughter sitting in a nesting aggregation of digger bees at her local school. So let me see, let me just play. You can see them if you can't hear them. But you can see, you know, being raised by a mom who did a lot of work with bees. She has no fear of them, and she doesn't need to. She really poses no threat to them. Oops. There we go. Okay, so many of our pollinators are in decline. And you can see the headlines, stated. And if you look at this picture on the right, we call this the windshield phenomenon. And actually the photo on the right, or the graphic on the top right, 1998, that's the year that I graduated from high school. So I remember I was a new driver, and many of you, I'm sure, remember you drive around and your windshield, especially at night, is caked in insects and insect insides, and it's really hard to get off, and it's a nuisance. But the alternative is, you can see the driver down here in the bottom in 2018 is smiling. He has no bugs on his windshield to clean off. But unfortunately, that is an alarm bell for a problem that we no longer have those insects coating our windshields. They're just not there. So what is causing this? Why are our pollinators in trouble? There's really 5 big culprits. The first is invasive species. Number 2, and these are in no particular order, pesticide misuse. So using pesticides prophylactically in the home and garden to create monocultures of lawn or crops on farms, which ultimately decreases biodiversity. Number 3 are parasites and disease, like we kind of already mentioned with the honeybees, that they can transfer some of these parasites and diseases to our wild bee populations. Climate change is a big one. This results in a mismatch between flower bloom and pollinator life cycles. So insects can be disadvantaged when a specific species of plant undergoes a change in its distribution and abundance. Maybe an insect emerges from its winter dormancy period, and the flower that it typically feeds on is not blooming at that time, and so it finds that it doesn't have something to eat. And then finally, habitat loss via vegetative monocultures, urbanization, sprawl. And so, not only are these factors in and of themselves problematic, but when these pressures interact with each other, it causes pollinators to be even more susceptible to the negative impacts of one factor in the presence of some of these other pressures. So we don't want to focus on the doom and gloom, it's happening unfortunately, but we want to focus on what can we do to combat this problem. So there are 3 primary habitat creation strategies that I will focus on. Number 1 is keep the natural habitat that you already have. Number 2 is create the habitat that you don't. And number 3 is to reduce pesticide use. So let's start with simply keep the habitat you have. You may be surprised at what you already have in your yard or garden that is useful to pollinators. You can create quality nesting habitat and overwintering habitat via the use of natural structures or by the addition of artificial structures. So ideally, you would make use of existing habitat by retaining what is already there, as opposed to cleaning dead material from your garden. So keep some of the elements that are listed here at the top of the slide, which make great nesting and overwintering refugia for pollinators. So it can be simple things like don't remove dead or downed wood. Wood-boring beetles create exit holes that are perfect for wood nesting bees. And additionally, some species, such as the much maligned carpenter bees, they may drill their own tunnels directly into softer wood that you are providing. Brush and rock piles, as well as native bunch grasses and sedges, create shelter interfaces with bare ground, and this provides ground nesting bee habitat. Karen was talking about all of the wildlife that is in her yard right now, and wow, I'm really impressed and jealous about the bobcat, by the way. But they also provide cover for small mammals, and then those abandoned burrows of those mammals can become perfect bumblebee nests. And rock pile crevices can provide a suitable location for cavity nests. Also shrubs, right? Shrubs are great to incorporate into your landscaping. And then some shrubs like sumac and elderberry, brambles like blackberries and raspberries. And in addition, with some of your forbs or your wildflowers, those that have hollow or pithy stems, they make perfect stem nesting bee habitat. So you can just simply not clear away your dead wildflowers. Instead, prune the stems to varying heights. We recommend between 8 to 24 inches. You can also prune your shrubs. And so this is going to create nesting habitat. And then the stems that you cut can be bundled together and just kind of piled over in and out of the way, corner of your yard. And that creates additional habitat because they can come in and use those bundles of stems as well. Also, come up with a management plan that limits mowing of unused margins. So maybe you have ditches, maybe you have a strip along the road or a grassy area. Maybe you say, we can give up this area and only mow it once a year, or only mow 20% of an area and mow a different section every year. Even in a really small yard, you can leave one patch unmowed as a refuge. And finally, the last thing I'll mention is just to limit tilling, as tilling destroys underground bee nests, as the one picture here at the top. About 70% of our native bees nest under the ground, so you can imagine if you were to till that up, you would destroy their nest. Okay, so the second thing that we were going to talk about is creating that habitat that you want to have in your yard, but maybe you don't have yet. So pollinator habitat is really wonderful in that it can also mitigate other environmental concerns. Pollinator plants often consist of deep-rooted perennials that have really extensive root systems. And these roots can control erosion, they can mitigate nutrient loss, phytoremediate soils, increase the soil's capacity to absorb and store water, and improve water quality. Native plants aid in stormwater management by slowing down stormwater and increasing infiltration to recharge groundwater sources, and it filters the water as it percolates through the soil. So when it comes to stormwater management, the mantra is really slow, spread, soak, and store. That's what we want to do with that water to keep it in our yards or on the landscapes where it will eventually soak into the ground and not allow it to run off into our storm sewers. And so some of the ways that we can do this through things like rain gardens, like this beautiful garden here on the right side, bioswales, detention pond retrofits, they can also be the foundation for a really great pollinator garden, as you can see in this picture. So you can effectively killed two birds with one stone by mitigating stormwater runoff and also installing pollinator habitat. And then I also included the photo on the left because I think it's a really good visual demonstration of this in action. So this was also taken in California. We have a lot of staff in California. That's where our headquarters is. But this was taken by one of our staff members, and it shows the farm on the right side of the road is owned by a different person than the farm on the left side of the road. And in 2022, California had some pretty devastating flooding events. And so you can see the farmer on the right had actually installed some conservation practices versus the one on the left, and the difference that it made in that rain event. Okay, so now that you've preserved the resources that you already have, it's time for the fun part, and that is to create the new habitat. And the key components of this are nesting habitat, food or floral resources, and protection from pesticides. So if we kind of talk through the nesting or overwintering habitat first and the important components of that, we have leaving bare patches of soil. Most of our bees, like I said, about 70% are ground nesting bees. And so they like to nest in bare ground or sparsely vegetated ground. So you can help these bees by simply leaving some areas of ground bare. So don't mulch every piece of ground, in your yard. And this photo shows ground nesting tunnels in bare ground. And sometimes people just don't realize what they're looking at, but once you start looking, you'll start seeing these native bee holes all over the place. Mud and leaves is another component. So in the picture on the left, you can see these perfect disc-shaped cutouts from these leaves. That is made by a leafcutter bee that's taking those discs out and taking them back to their nest to form these separations between the cells where they're laying their eggs. And mud, many pollinators also will use mud to create their nests. We talked a little bit about woody debris, things that bore into it and nest inside that soft wood. Pithy stems are very important. About the other 30% of our native bees are tunnel nesters, and they make their homes in these pithy stems of plants or in holes in wood. And so you can provide nesting habitat for these types of bees just by leaving your flower stalks and wood piles in your yard. And you can install artificial houses as well. We do have a resource on this on our website. It's okay to use these if you feel like you want to provide more habitat, but you just have to be careful and use good practices with these. Do your research, because they can actually end up being detrimental to bees if they're not maintained properly and they're not built to the right specifications. Host plants are an important aspect of nesting or nesting habitat, which we'll talk a little bit more about soon. Leaf litter is a great place for these pollinators to have refuge to spend the winter in. And then bunch grasses again and rodent burrows are great interfaces for things like bumblebees to build their nests. Okay, so the second component of good habitat was forage. So native plants, of course, I don't need to tell the Native Plant Society, are the gold standard and what we really want to strive for. And it can be, trees, shrubs, forbs, and grasses. The more natives that you can incorporate, the more biodiversity into your space, the better. So we really aim like the goal that we aim for, kind of like at a minimum, and of course you can always go up from there, is to try to have at least 3 species blooming in every season. So 3 in spring, 3 in summer, and 3 in fall, because the idea is, when those pollinators emerge from their dormancy period in early spring, it can be really hard for them to find food resources. So you want them to have something to eat right away. And then again, as you get later and later into the year, as we're about to encounter some of those flowering plants start to go away from the landscape too. And you really want to make sure that they have something to eat all the way up until they go dormant again or migrate away. So the more of that period that you can fill with blooming plants, the better. You want to consider having a diversity of floral shapes, colors, sizes, and heights. We call these the pollinator syndromes because different pollinators have co-evolved with many of these plants and are more effective at pollinating or accessing those nectar and pollen resources in some than others. Okay, so here's where we'll really kind of touch on host plants. Perhaps the most well-known host plant relationship is that of the milkweed and the monarch butterfly. If you live in Alabama, you are within the monarch's flyway, their migratory flyway. You don't get as many there, and my parents verify this as we do here in Arkansas. You're a little bit more over on the margin, but nonetheless, you're definitely within the flyway of the monarch and therefore in a position to do something to help. So I would say the best thing you can do is to plant milkweed. There are about 120 species of milkweed in the United States. So you just have to, find out which ones are native to where you live. But monarch populations have declined by about 90% over the last 20 years. And this map shows the timing of the monarch migration, where they are at various times throughout the year. And so right now we're into their peak migration here in late September through mid-October, coming right through Arkansas, and like that last graphic showed the edge here of Alabama. So keep your eye out. You should be seeing them. Okay, another component of habitat, you can provide moist soil and water. And then finally, and somebody had commented on this in that picture that I had up at the beginning about how the flowers were in clumps, right? So it is a good strategy to plant in groupings like that because it creates a larger visual target for those pollinators. So if you think about a tiny insect moving around the landscape from above and you just have one plant here, one plant there, it might be a little bit more difficult for them to locate them versus if you have a large showy clump of whatever that is that they're looking for. So then that third component of a healthy habitat is to reduce or eliminate the use of pesticides. So Pollinator Partnership really wants to promote the use of IPM, or integrated pest management, in your space, which is a science-based process to solve pest problems while minimizing risk to people and the environment. So in order to implement IPM strategies in your garden, you really want to understand your system. So take time to observe the interactions that are taking place. Understand that beneficial insects in your garden will keep pests in check. And redefine pests. So kind of reconsider what you define in your day-to-day as a quote pest. Are you willing to tolerate the presence of some insects or weeds in your garden? Are they really doing any harm? Many people strive for a lawn that looks like the photo on the top. So just a monoculture of turf grass, and they don't tolerate anything else. However, the dandelions and clover add a splash of color while also feeding those early emerging bees when little else is available for them to eat. So again, it's just kind of reframing that idea that, maybe these plants don't need to be considered villains. Maybe we can learn to tolerate them. And so, continual monitoring is important in an IPM approach. And we just say that if you've decided that you are going to use pesticides, then just use them as a very last resort, and then be mindful. Make sure you're following all the directions. Make sure you're not applying when plants are in bloom. Choose targeted treatments over mixes, and use spot treatment where possible. But again, as a last resort, once you've exhausted all of your other options. Okay, so we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty of planting now. You are ready to prepare your site. And I cannot stress enough how important site prep is. I know many people get really excited to build the garden and they skip this step, and then they will spend the rest of their garden's life paying for skipping this step. So it's very important so that you're not constantly pulling out invasives, pulling out turf grass, pulling out Bermuda grass, things like this. So you really need to remove the sod, which forms a thick mat so that no seeds that you sow are going to reach the soil. remove any invasives, remove any non-desirables before planting what you want. If you are going to sow seeds, it is important to have bare dirt for seed to soil contact in order to have successful germination. Compost and mulch are your friend. So having a supply of that decayed, broken down organic material that we know is compost to improve nutrient composition. More so if you're growing vegetables and non-natives, not quite so important if you're gearing towards a native plant garden. But I also encourage it just because you're going to recycle your food waste, and chances are you're going to find somewhere to use that's useful instead of going into our landfill. And then mulch, of course, is going to be good to have on hand because it does help suppress weeds. It does help retain moisture. And it also serves a really important role, especially in a brand new garden. There are many ways to eliminate existing vegetation and prepare the soil for a garden. These are some of the more common methods: sheet mulching, lasagna gardening, solarization, sod removal, tilling. There's really no right or wrong way. They all have pros or cons. Some of them are site specific. Some of them are season specific. Some of them depend on the amount of time and effort that you want to put into it and how quickly you want to plant. Maybe you have a steady supply of free cardboard. That's, one reason to use cardboard to lay down to smother. If you live in a really, really hot, sunny area, like many areas of Tennessee that it's not shaded, then solarization might be what you want to go for. But like I said, tilling we talked about earlier can be bad because it can destroy the underground structure of the soil and bee nests. So you really want to do your homework ahead of time and decide which one of these, or maybe a couple of them in tandem, to prepare your site. If you plan to utilize raised beds or containers, then of course you'll want to have those built and prepped and filled with soil and ready, and you want to make sure that you have access to water nearby. Especially, if you, like, maybe as the TNPS, you're doing a community project or something, or building a community garden somewhere. And so, that would be important to make sure that you've located a water source before you put in the garden. Be careful not to compact the soil in your workspace. You can use stepping stones and walking paths to minimize that, but those kind of play a twofold role because they're also an attractive component for your garden. And by creating pathways and borders and adding edging, you make your space look really intentional, right? And as we know, although native plant gardening is getting more and more popular, which is exciting to see, a lot of people still don't like the untidy look of it. And so by creating these, what we call cues for care, and showing, by using stepping stones and creating borders, you're saying, this isn't just a space that I've just let go. This is an intentional space that I have created by using these elements in your garden. So having a layout before you get started can be really helpful. You can sketch out a rough plan of how you envision your garden looking. This photo on the right was actually just submitted by one of our Bee Friendly Gardening members, so I pulled it just for this. I really don't know anything about it or how it turned out, but it's just important at this point in time to manage your expectations, because often, this plan is going to change over time, but at least you have a plan. And then, my recommendation is to start small. Start with just a few plants in a small area and then build that out over time, instead of starting too big, because you can quickly get in over your head with the maintenance. And then, as we all know, many public gardens started with a good intention, maybe a native plant garden or a rain garden by a library. And then what happens often is they kind of just get let go, and then they fail, and then they become an eyesore, and then people aren't happy about it and they want them taken out. So we want those native plant gardens, especially in public areas, to look good and encourage others to want to do it too. So things to consider, some of this is just kind of obvious, right? Plant tall plants behind and shorter plants up front. If you have shrubs, put those towards the back. You might include small trees, but all this to say, the garden that you start with isn't going to be the garden that you end with. So it's really easy to overplant, or when everything is little, it looks like it's going to be fine. But then, that tree might get big and suddenly your sun-loving pollinator plants are shaded out by a rather large tree. So when you're doing your planning, just be careful to kind of consider that future garden or that mature garden. Even fences and walls can create micro habitats where maybe they're shading out something that you didn't consider, and that plant likes sun, so it's not going to do well. So think about that when you're designing your garden. And then you might also consider planting ground covers in between your plants. So here in Arkansas, our state butterfly is the Diana butterfly, the Diana fritillary, and it's actually not doing very well. We don't see that much anymore. And there's a grassroots group here called the Diana Project, and their whole goal is to document where people are seeing this butterfly and get people to plant violets, right? Which is the Diana's host plant. And violets are everywhere, and they make a great living mulch. So something like violets or native strawberries you can plant, and I know not all of these plants here are native, and some of them are not very friendly actually, but the idea is that you get these ground covers, hopefully native ground covers, and you just kind of fill in the spaces, and then you don't have to use wood mulch, and they take care of it for you. And personally, when I plant, I like to space plants closer than is recommended, because I think, one, it looks more natural, like those plants are meant to, and two, it just reduces the need for mulch and it minimizes weeds. Make sure you have all of your supplies on hand. One of the things that is always kind of perplexing for me is you would think that if you dug a hole and you put a plant in that hole that already had an existing root ball, and then you put all that dirt back, you would have too much dirt. But it defies logic, and somehow I never have enough. So I always, try to have a tarp with some extra soil and compost on hand, so that I have extra to fill that hole back in. Just be careful that you don't end up with an air pocket underneath that plant, which is why we kind of tamp around it and make sure that the soil packs in around it and not an empty space. Make sure you have all of the tools on hand before you get started. It'll make it a lot less frustrating for you. And then the fun part is selecting your plants. So we have some really fantastic resources. I'm sure you have really great resources there locally in Tennessee that you can use to decide what you want to put in your garden. I admittedly didn't do my research. I should have looked at your site first, but you probably have maybe your own website, but we have some really great resources on our website that I'll just point you to in case you want another source. But we have some zip code based eco-regional guides where you just put in your zip code and it will give you a plant list appropriate for your eco-region. We have these regional garden cards that are a bit more broad scale, but the idea is it's just a good starting place for somebody that doesn't really know where to start. And so for you could get the Southeast card, and it recommends 3 spring, summer, and fall blooming plants that you can put in like a 3x6 area just to have a ready-made quick pollinator garden. We have some more sophisticated tools like the Find Your Roots tool, where you can actually input, this level of sunlight that an area gets and the level of moisture and where you are, and it'll give you even what color plant you might want in an area, and it would give you recommendations. But the other heartening thing to see is, I know here where I live, and I'm sure probably where many of you live, is that more of these local native plant sales are starting to pop up. I know that right now we're in the midst of that season, and so almost every weekend some local native nursery is having a plant sale, which is fun to go check those out. So sometimes sourcing the plants can be the tricky part. Keep in mind timing. If you're going to plant seeds, then the best time to plant those seeds is in winter, so that they will be cold stratified and then they will germinate in the spring. They have to go through that cold, moist stratification process though. And then if you're going to plant plugs, spring and fall right now are a good time to do that, because you don't want to plant plugs in summer. Their survivability will go way down, but spring and fall are a good time for actual plants going in the ground. Of course, you can always try to grow your own plants from seed. You've probably all heard of the milk jug method. This was my attempt at the milk jug method, that you can create your own little mini greenhouses, and make your own seedlings. I learned the hard way. My one big mistake in this was that I used a Sharpie to write the names and it all rubbed off. So all of my plants that germinated, I didn't know what they were. So that was really frustrating and disheartening. So don't use a Sharpie. I've heard use a paint pen. Okay, so once you have your plants, it's nice to kind of sit them out, arrange them where you want so you can get a visual. At this point, you can move them around if you wish before you start to actually, dig the hole of their appropriate size. If the plants are root bound in their pots, then you're going to want to kind of gently separate out those roots, get them in the ground. Give them a really good soak after you get them planted. You're going to want to keep them well watered during the establishment period. So really for the first year, make sure that you're keeping an eye on them. If it's especially hot or dry, you might want to give them some extra waterings, let's say once or twice a week, depending on what's going on. But it's better to water them less often and deeper so that those roots will go down deep, instead of creating really shallow roots by frequent shallow watering. So, and then this is a good time to mulch around them to help retain some of that moisture that you're trying to keep in as they get established. So I like to show this slide. Many native plants after the first year, they become established and they don't really need much water. They may need some supplemental water during a drought period or if they're showing signs of heat stress. But many prairie plants are notorious for their deep and extensive root systems, which makes them more tolerant to drought and other adverse conditions compared to ornamental and some non-prairie species. So, the picture on the left, if you look on the very, very, very left, you see the tiny little graphic of turf grass, which basically has no root system. And then everything else there has roots that go up to 16 feet deep under the ground. So, big and little bluestem and switchgrass and Indian grass, river oats, all of these have really deep roots in contrast to the mat forming turf grasses. And then I really like the two photos on the right. This was from an actual exhibit at the U.S. Botanic Garden where they used glycerin to preserve the roots of these plants that they dug up. So you can really see what it looks like underground. But I think they just really capture the disparity between the above ground and the below ground biomass of many of these native plant species. So in addition to needing minimal water, plants adapted to your ecoregion don't need special care. They're resistant to most insects and diseases, and they attract the beneficial insects that have co-evolved along with them to your garden. So after you've planted, there's going to be some maintenance required. Pulling out things that sprout up that you don't want there, just kind of keeping that under wraps until things fill in, like maybe those living ground covers that you've gotten started. And, your garden's going to constantly evolve. You've got some short-lived biennials like the cardinal flower. This is the one on the right. That was my garden. It bloomed, it was beautiful, and then it never came back. So, then I had a hole and I needed to put something there in that spot. So it's fun to kind of replace or add over time. Some plants self-seed and they kind of move around in your garden over time. So it's constantly evolving, and that's part of the fun, I think, of native plant gardening. As we talk about seasonal maintenance, I guess, don't necessarily think of fall as a time to, quote, clean up your garden, but rather a time to prepare it for rest and recharging. Your plants go dormant, your pollinators are hibernating, and remember some of the catchy phrases like these. They are important. They put nutrients back into the soil. They provide habitat for overwintering insects. It's okay to have an untidy garden. Sometimes we have to retrain ourselves, or we try to convey this to our neighbors. Structure and texture can provide interest and be beautiful. Not to mention that it's critical for pollinators to have a place to overwinter. If we're only providing beautiful plants for them to feed off of, but we're not supporting them through the rest of their life cycle, then we're really only helping with part of the problem. So I like this graphic on the right from Heather Holm, say the whole save the stems idea. This graphic really kind of is a visual depiction of how that actually works. So how to cut them, and then how that opens up those stems for nesting bees. And furthermore, then once you cut those stems, this is an example of chop and drop. So you just drop the cut flower heads to allow them to decompose and contribute those nutrients back towards your soil. And then the figure on the left shows some plants that have suitable hollow or pithy stems. So these are examples of plants that would create really good stem nesting bee habitat. So if that's what your goal is, then you can include some of these in your landscape. And then, you know, this, in my opinion, this is the why, right? This is why we do this, for these interesting animals that move in and enjoy, and the beautiful plants that we, you know, enjoy looking at when we go out to our gardens. So don't forget to take photos and document what shows up to enjoy your hard work, right? Don't forget the why if you get so caught up in the details of the gardening itself. Signs explaining what you are doing are very important to raise awareness and encourage neighbors to get involved. So you might consider adding a sign to your space. And then I was going to take you just through kind of a quick photo journey of my own garden. Actually don't live in this house anymore. We moved last year and got a little bit more space, and I got to start all over again. But the fun thing is, I got to take some of my trial and error of my first garden in my old house and start over with some things that I learned, right? So that's really what it's all about. Like, so much of it is just trying things out and getting better as we go. So this was in Centerton, Arkansas. It was just in, as my husband says, a cookie cutter neighborhood. You know, these builders came in and cleared everything and threw these houses up, and it was a small lot. But you can see that, you know, I started with not very much, and these photos show some of my earlier plantings when I had to use a lot of mulch. These are the garden when it was about 3 to 4 years old. Like I said, I definitely made some mistakes and learned a lot on the way. My mom from Alabama, when she comes to visit, she likes to bring plants, and she gave me a plant that had something in the soil that I didn't recognize, and I went ahead and planted it, which was a big mistake. And I later learned it was creeping Jenny, as I'm sure you guys all are very aware of. And pretty soon it took over the whole side yard, and I spent the next 8 years that we lived there battling it. So that was a big mistake. That's that same area on the right that I slowly converted over. There's some milkweed and Biden's Aristosa that I collected on a local prairie. So I moved it more towards the native side, but there was definitely still the problem with the invasive that I put there. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but it's not advisable to fertilize many native plants because it actually causes them to get too tall and leggy and they fall over. Like these phlox and the gray-headed coneflower, I added no compost or fertilizer, but yet they always still got really tall and they would flop over the garden path. And the bees loved them. And so then my children would not walk down the garden path because of the bees. So I would have planted those farther back had I known that that is how they were going to behave. Something that we found really fun and exciting was to add various host plants over time to the garden and then watch for the caterpillar to come. And it was truly an example of, if you plant it, they will come. I don't think we ever planted a host plant that we didn't nearly immediately find the caterpillar on it that it was host for. So we had Dutchman's pipevine there on the left. You can see the passion flower in the middle, which hosts the Gulf fritillary. And then of course, we had 3 species of milkweed for the monarchs, but also milkweed tussock moss and some other things that feed on the milkweed. And this is a good time to just remind you that host plants are meant to be eaten, right? So it doesn't matter if the leaves get munched on a little bit, that just means they're doing their job. So the practices that we discussed today are scalable, from the smallest container garden to a backyard garden to a demonstration or community garden. Like this photo is the USDA People's Garden in Washington, D.C., up to large scale restoration sites like this prairie in Arkansas. So I just want to emphasize that adding habitat will have a positive influence no matter how much size that you have influence over. And anybody can create habitat, no matter how small your space. It can be a window box or a couple of potted plants, and even those provide valuable food resources. So if you think about, a migrating monarch that has to hopscotch across the landscape, your containerized pollinator plant might be just what it needed to sustain it to the next patch of food resources that it can find. So the photos on this slide were taken, this is actually the second floor apartment balcony of our conservation program manager who lives in Ohio. And she says she has 17 species of native wildflowers that bloom from spring to fall, and she gets all kinds of pollinators on it, and she even gets visited by hummingbirds. So, and this is just a balcony garden. So your space has a lot to offer, and it can make a big impact, and you can increase your impact by recruiting your neighbor. It's hard for pollinators to find floral and host plant resources if they are few and far between. And this is where I just kind of want to drive home the point that some of these native solitary bees have such tiny home ranges that they likely will complete their entire life cycle in maybe just your backyard and never exit your backyard. So your yard could be their entire world. So just think about, can they find what they need there? Can they find food? Can they find a safe place to raise their young and an environment without chemicals? And then, it is important to create connectivity across the landscape through wildlife and habitat corridors, and neighborhoods can play an important role in this. So it's important to extend your efforts into your own yard and beyond if possible. There are so many possibilities of land use types on which we can install habitat, which create so many potential corridors and networks. There's a lot of marginal lands in our daily environment. When you're out and about, just kind of look around and look, where do you see under or unutilized spaces that could be turned into pollinator habitat? Maybe it's a parking lot median. Maybe it's a little, turf grass lawn outside of a business, or maybe it's these what we call like hell strips or boulevard strips, the strip of grass between the street and the sidewalk. So there's really a lot of space out there that could be turned into very useful habitat. Often it just takes somebody to spearhead the effort. So we know that creating habitat is good for pollinators, but it's also good for communities. Pollinators, celebrating pollinators and creating habitat and engaging with people that we may not have engaged with otherwise without this common goal of pollinator conservation are all wonderful ways to connect with others in nature and at a community level in your own communities. So here's my quick plug for Pollinator Partnership, my organization. We are a not-for-profit organization. We have all kinds of programs and opportunities that you can get involved with. These are just some of the programs that we administer. We do Pollinator Week, which is the third week of every June. There's our website, pollinator.org. I encourage you to go there and check out our many resources. You can join the Pollinator Action Team, in which case you'll get a monthly e-newsletter delivered just talking about some of the things that we have going on. Bee Friendly Gardening is the program that I manage, and it's a membership program working with the public to help protect, preserve, and promote pollinator health. It's not just for backyard gardens, by the way, as you can see in that graphic. It's really for really any landscape in which you can install habitat. Sign up for Bee Friendly Gardening, which if you want to check it out, you can scan this QR code or you can go to our website and find it. You sign up and you get a host of benefits that are available to you, starting with a digital welcome packet that you will receive upon sign up, which will unlock a lot of other member benefits like a monthly newsletter, access to the BFG store, and what I think is the best part, opportunities to interact with and be inspired by other Bee Friendly Gardening members. There are resources out there to help you install habitat, and a lot of people just don't know that, but oftentimes landowners can get support from partners and programs like the USDA's NRCS. Their federal farm bill programs support pollinator habitat through various conservation practices. So that's something that you can definitely look into. You might have state programs available to you. In Arkansas, we have the Acres for Wildlife program, in which landowners can get assistance to install wildlife habitat. Oftentimes through these, you can get free technical advice and sometimes cost share assistance. It's just depending on the program and what your goals are. And then, of course, local groups like your native plant societies, master gardeners, master naturalists, Wild Ones is a fantastic organization. And there are a lot of resources out there that you can get plugged into for sure. These are just some of the ones that we have here locally. Some are federal, like the NRCS, and then our state, and some local nonprofits. So I'm just going to end by highlighting that conserving native bees and other pollinators by creating habitat does a lot more than just support bees. These habitats have many other values, as you can see outlined here on one of our previous posters. We put out an annual poster every year that we commission an artist to do. But you can see in this poster a lot of the services that are provided by our pollinators. And not only do pollinators benefit, but we also benefit from that. So with that, I thank you for your time. And here is my name and here is my email address. And you are more than welcome to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions or comments or feedback. So thank you so much for your time today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sara.
You are very welcome.
I'm looking at the chat and we have the first photo you had up, the California garden, beautiful photo on the screen. Question: how critical is it that a native plant be part of the local ecosystem? For example, Tennessee coneflower is not native to all parts of Tennessee. Does that matter?
So that's that can be controversial in some circles or not, just depending on the demographics, right? As I'm sure you all know. So some people feel really strongly that you're only using local ecotype plants, and it runs the gamut and the spectrum all the way to maybe you're using nativars that never really were in your area, but at least they stem from a native plant, whether or not it was ever where you grew it, but maybe it's native to the United States. So that's a hard one to answer. I think that there's a lot of nuance involved, and I think there's a lot of personal opinion involved in that. I know that I'm not doing a good job of answering that, but some people are native plant purists and some people are local ecotype purists. As an organization, we try to take a bit of a middle road approach because we just want to move the needle. We want everybody to try to do better. And the more people that we can not alienate and the more people that we can get to do better, we think that that's the way to make the biggest difference. So we are not anti non-natives in your garden. Now we are anti-invasives and noxious and things that are harmful. But if you really enjoy your peonies that were handed down from your grandma and you want to include those in your garden, go for it. And we also recognize the value of there are some non-native plants that are valuable to pollinators. So there's been some studies recently that kind of tout 70% as a good goal in a built landscape. If you can have 70% of your managed landscape native, then you're doing pretty good. And what I mean by that is like that chickadee study that I referred to, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Doug Tallamy's work. That's kind of a threshold that they have found that yards that have 70% support a lot more wildlife diversity than those that don't. So, of that 70%, if they're local ecotype, great for you. They're hard to find though. If they're native to Tennessee, maybe even a nativar to Tennessee, then I'd say you're doing pretty good if 70% of your yard is that. But you're going to find people that are going to disagree with me too.
I think there's a sliding scale. The full natives that are native to the particular location are the ideal. Next to that would be those that maybe aren't exactly in that right area, but they're kind of close, like in the question. And also in that category would be ones that are not full on native, but maybe nativars. If we go from full native to fully invasive, and there's a wide range in between. The closer you can get to the full native, the better. But some of the others aren't bad either.
I think that sums it up pretty good. Yeah.
Next question, Todd Crabtree. The biggest concern with coneflowers is hybridization. It is important to keep the common species isolated from the rare one. It is not good to grow other purple coneflowers, such as the more common purple coneflower, near natural populations of Tennessee coneflower. If you are far from a rare coneflower population, you could enjoy seeing the variety that results from the hybrids that result if you plant different purple coneflowers together and get seedlings. So
Yes.
thank you, Todd. That's important.
That's such a good point. And you know, again, that's very state specific, right? When I first started with Pollinator Partnership, I was the Arkansas state coordinator for an effort that we had called Project Wingspan, and it was across 8 states in the Midwest. And we formed volunteer seed collection teams that would go out on the landscape, and we would get permits for wild areas for them to go collect. And then we would locate projects that wanted that seed, and we kept it all separated. You know, Arkansas was divided into 3 ecoregions, and even within those ecoregions, that collected seed went back to projects in that ecoregion. So we were very careful, but even in designing that, our plant list had to vary pretty significantly between states, because some states, like with the coneflower example, said, we have a sensitive species here, therefore we don't want you collecting and intermingling that. Whereas in other states, you know, coneflowers were a go, they were fine. But then in a different state, there'd be a different species. So yes, there's, again, so much nuance with it, and you really need to do your research and know if that is important to you, where that's coming from, and to be sensitive to those wild populations.
Yes. Robert Davis, congratulations on a beautiful garden. I'm glad to hear you think wild strawberry is a good natural ground cover, because it has volunteered in my garden. Mine too. Tim Keltonback asks, what is lasagna gardening?
Lasagna gardening. So kind of like my lasagna recipe might be different from your lasagna recipe, but it's layered nonetheless. That's really kind of the take-home point of lasagna gardening, is you're layering your browns and your greens, right? Like the idea of composting, but you're kind of composting on site. Oh, I'm sorry about that beeping. I don't know if you can hear that. It'll go off shortly. Okay. So you're kind of composting on location. So if you have a site where you want to build a garden, you just start composting right there on the site. So you do layers of browns and layers of greens, and over and over and over, until you get a pretty good foundation. And then as that starts to break down, it suppresses the weeds, and you have a nutrient-rich garden ready to go. But there's no specific quote recipe, just like in lasagna recipes, that the layering is the important part.
By browns and greens, do you mean brown like cardboard or dry leaves?
Yes. Yeah. It's your carbon versus your nitrogen, basically. So like your green, quote, wet, I guess, you know, food waste and things that you would layer with like your dried brown leaves and cardboard and things like that. Exactly.
Okay. All right, Lorraine says, thank you very much. This was very helpful. Another Robert says, some natives have specific requirements for soil type and exposure and might not survive everywhere. But I think if you like it and it survives in your garden, good for you and the plant. Lynn Davis.
Sounds good.
All right. Does anyone else have questions? If so, unmute and fire away here. Anyone else? No questions? I find that amazing. You covered a lot of territory and you did it very well. Thank you, Sarah.
Well, thank you all of you for hosting me. I appreciate the chance to talk to you.
All right. Any questions? Lori? Are you putting your hand up? No? Okay.
Well, I can ask a question.
All right. Go
It's
ahead, Brian.
uh, if you looked at our 1 acre at our house, my wife's done a wonderful job. The problem is we have so many oaks that we are literally like 90% in the shade. And during the day, the little bit of break that's the road in front of our house, where the sun gets to come at an angle into the front yard, we might get 2 or 3 hours of sun there, but it's even not the whole front yard. So I don't know what the most successful plants are that stay native. And I am one of those purists. I want native that's right here. We have a nature park here in Fairview that's like all loblolly. And even though that's native to Tennessee, it's not native to where we are right here. It only comes up to the lower part of Tennessee. So it's native down there, but not here. So I got into a lot of nice discussions with that. But yeah, what's the best kind of variety I can do that's literally when you're in total shade? Oh, well, yeah, literally it is almost total shade.
It's definitely not ideal for a lot of pollinator plants, right? But so like off the top of my head, I would encourage you to go to our website to that. I mentioned it. It's called the Find Your Roots tool because it allows you to enter a lot of different parameters, and then it evaluates based on that what would be ideal, and it's location specific too. So I would give that a go with like, full shade as one of your parameters. It's going to ask you, you can put as much or as little into it as you want. I mean, and by that, I mean, you could put like your location and full shade and that's it, all the way up to it's a wet area and this is the season that I would like something to bloom in. So you can get as specific or as general as you want. So you can play with it. You can put very few parameters in up to more specific and then just see what you get. Start with that. And I guess if that's not helpful for you, then definitely feel free to reach out and I can kind of help you troubleshoot and see if we can find something else that you could go with.
Thank you.
Another possibility, Brian, is go to the Tennessee, Kentucky plant atlas that's online and look at your county, your specific part of your county, and see what grew there in the past and what tolerates shade.
Yeah, we transplanted some milkweed and I was surprised that it doesn't mind shade. I was surprised at that. So the milkweed's thriving. So we've got that. And then
Your spring ephemerals should work.
I'm trying to remember I hate having senior moments. We have, I guess you call it a vine. It's you have American, Japanese, and Chinese. Someone remind me what wisteria. We have a Japanese wisteria that's going wild under a tree. It doesn't get shade. I was surprised at that. So we brought in another one, the American wisteria, and it's surprisingly doing good on the other side over here. So I just, we keep trying to find new ones that are native to Tennessee that will survive in a lot of shade. And about half of the ones we tried don't make it.
Well, you gave it a try. You gave it a try.
Yeah.
So sometimes
also, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sometimes trying is the best we can do.
Oh, my wife, that's all she does is try. That's her therapy. It's cheaper than a psychiatrist to go out in the front yard and garden. You think I'm kidding?
Me too. No, I don't. That's me.
You're going to say it can be expensive efforts though if you keep putting in and it keeps not making it. So, but I was going to mention like a lot of these native plant sales. And again, I understand that you guys are spread all over Tennessee and some of you might be in much more rural areas versus if you're around, Knoxville or Nashville, it can make a difference. But Many of our native plant sales, I like it because they'll even group things according, they'll have like a greenhouse over here that's all of like your understory shade plants. And so depending on what you're looking for, you can go right to that section and they're native to your area. And so it makes it super easy. So I don't know, maybe one of yours does something like that and they've already done the research for your area and they say like, here they are, like come and get them, and they're all grouped together. So
Well, I'm in an active wild ones group, so we have those quite a few times. So they're pretty helpful.
that's great.
Just trying to find the ones that'll succeed and stay longer than just a few seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just FYI for those that are listening in, there are two native plant sales that I'm aware of. One is coming up in Chattanooga, and that's a wild ones native plant sale. And then we also have one coming up in October in Brentwood. And again, that's at Owl's Hill with a native in connection with wild ones. So we do have two that I'm aware of. If anyone else is aware of another one, please let me know. I do post them on our website, so we try and get the information out there to as many as possible. Jerry Thornton says trees and understory shrubs can be pollinator plants too, particularly locusts, coffee tree, and catalpa. But oaks, maples, elms, and hickories attract their own set of pollinators.
That's the beauty of having nothing but oaks in your yard, one elm. I get so many birds because I get so many caterpillars. I mean,
Yes. Yeah. Got to feed those caterpillars though. I know they love the oaks, but some of them need something else too. Brad Fox says the Tennessee Kentucky Plant stumbling here. Tennessee Kentucky Plant Atlas is an excellent resource. So it's something we've helped to fund. TNPS has helped to fund it, and it is a wonderful resource. And you can put in some of the parameters again, and it's specific to what has grown in the past in your specific location. So.
Just one comment. When you mentioned, Brian, the oaks, I think it was in the Washington Post last week where a nature writer talked about the hackberry, the common hackberry tree, which everybody in the South hates and they consider it a trash tree. And I've got it all over my property, and I'm not a Southerner, and so I was kind of amazed at, I was starting to become like, oh, that's just an old hackberry. And they said that that is a feast for wildlife. The berries, the leaves, it attracts lots of caterpillars, it feeds birds. And so I've been on my morning walks and going out in my own woods. I've just been marveling at all the hackberry trees. So if you see them, you may not want to look at them with a jaundiced eye anymore.
I found a hackberry, is it hackberry emperor butterfly?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
when I found it on my deck, I went, a hackberry. Wow, because there's the hackberry tree right there.
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah, we have a chestnut tree, one chestnut tree in the backyard. And we yesterday, just walking out on the back deck, I saw 4 deer and I want to say badger, but it's not, a woodchuck in the middle of the 4 deer, all 5 of them just sitting there eating chestnuts, just happy as the people just don't realize. Yeah.
yeah. Turkeys are another one. Around oaks in particular, you can get turkeys and deer eating acorns in a mast year. So, any other questions? Well, Sara, thank you. This has actually been a wonderful program. I've enjoyed it. You've hit us with a lot of information, but it's good information. It's solid. I'm thrilled. Thank you for coming. And really, I'm happy that it's going to be because it's recorded. We can put this up and recommend it for people that are putting in gardens.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. And again, I'm also happy for any of you to reach out at any point.
Thank you. All right. With that, I'm going to say good night to everyone and see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent program.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming.